Okay, so kind of the last step of a two-dimensional work, particularly one that is on paper like this and not on something that's mounted like a rigid canvas board or something like that, is going to be to mat the work. And a mat kind of looks like a colored border or a frame, so kind of something like this. And in matting, the goal is that we're making our work presentation quality. We're kind of making the edges look nice. We are visually separating it from whatever it would be displayed on, like a wall or a display board or whatever surface it ends up on. And this, as artists, gives us some control over how it's presented as well. So we can control things like what color it's matted with. We can control how wide the mat ends up, how much of that colored space exists between our work and the background. Some people will even do like a double or a triple mat where they might have one color and then another kind of little hairline second color that might be a contrasting color. So it gives you all sorts of choices as far as how you want to display your work and how you want your viewer to see it and to encounter it. So I'm going to show you on your small piece of work how to do that today so that when you do it on your larger work, you already have the experience because it's much easier to learn when you do it smaller. So I will give you each one of these matting guide sheets, and this is kind of a visual way to make sure you have all the measurements and to account for all of the space that you want to mat. Okay, so the first thing that you need to do is kind of fill in all of these measurements that it's asking for on the visual diagram. So this is the piece that we're going to work with as our example today. Okay, the dimensions of this, okay, and the way that I kind of have the math built into this matting guide sheet does do a lot of buffering for discrepancies in your measurements. So you don't have to measure like down to the 16th of an inch or anything really specific like that. This will kind of allow for some wiggle room. Okay, so for the purposes of this, I have 4 inches across and I have 6 inches high. Okay, your dimensions on your artwork or on your practice piece might differ, so you are going to have to do your own measuring. But for this one, our width is 4 inches, and here's the important part. When you write down the width, you are going to subtract 1 inch. Okay, that's really, really important. What that allows for is that this window mat, that's what these are called, it overlaps your artwork by a 1/2 inch on each side. Okay, so that's going to cover any like really worn edges, or if there's any like tearing or anything weird on the edges that looks unfinished, this will cover that by a 1/2 inch on each side. So that's why we subtract 1 inch. So this was 4 inches across, so I'm going to write 3 for the width because I have 4 minus 1. And then for the height, this was 6 and then minus 1, so I'm going to write 5. And then we have to decide how big do we want that border. So for this one, this is a 2-inch border. So a 2-inch border is a pretty safe bet for most sizes of pieces, but you can kind of see, depending on the size of your work, if you were matting, like say your grid portrait, you might want to do like a 3 or a 4-inch mat because the work itself is larger. But that's up to you and what looks best with your work. And if you're not sure, you can always cut away the extra edges on your work, and then you can kind of hold it up against your mat. And then you can hold it at different distances to kind of visually see, okay, what looks the best? Does it look better with a really giant mat? Does it look better with kind of a really narrow mat? And that is, like I said, that's up to your artistic choice and your artistic decision. For the purposes of just making it easy to work with, I would say don't go less than 1 inch for your border. And in fact, I would say 2 inches is probably a little bit easier to work with than 1 inch, especially for your first time. So let's do a 2-inch border. Here's another trick. You must add that 2-inch border on both sides. If you don't do that, then this math isn't going to work because you're only accounting for it on one side, and that's a really common mistake. Okay, so I added my 2-inch border on all 4 sides. So now we have to total it up. So the total width is the sum of these 3 numbers. So we have 2 plus 3 plus 2, and that equals 7 inches. And then our total height is these 3 numbers. Always make sure you're adding all 3 numbers because, like I said, we have to make sure we account for borders on both sides. So that is 9 inches. So our steps then are right here. So we're going to measure and cut the height and the width of the mat. So that means that I am cutting a mat that is 7 by 9 inches. Okay. So I just picked this yellow color because it is easy to see. So I'm going from the 0 because I'm actually measuring for distance. I'm going to measure 9 inches across. Just like we did for grid portraits, I'm going to slide the ruler down. This is awkward because my camera situation. I'm going to make sure my ruler is parallel down here with the edge of the page. Remember that you must make 2 measurements, top and bottom, before you draw that line to cut it. And then I am going to make a line straight across between my top measurement and my bottom measurement. Okay, so that's my 9 inches, and then I'm going to make a 7-inch mark on the top, slide it down, make a 7-inch mark on the bottom, and then do the same thing where I connect the 2 marks. Okay, again, if you find that you do not have 2 actual marks that you're connecting, then you have skipped a step. So make sure that you are always measuring first on both sides before you make your line. And then I'm going to cut that 7 by 9 piece out. Now we're matting with colored paper. We're going to use construction paper because it's easy to work with. If you were doing this like at the college level or on a professional level, you would be using mat board, which is like a dense cardboard. It usually has like a white core in the middle, and it might have white or black or some other color on the outside. And then when you cut out your window, you would be making a beveled cut. So it would be cut at an angle, and then that white core would show as like an extra little hairline of color. But the measurements and the concept are the same. So whether you learn it on paper or on mat board, the math part is the same. So we have measured and cut the height and the width. Now our next step is to draw these border lines on the back of the mat. And they're going to look just like this. So make sure I'm looking here and I can still see that there's my pencil mark on here. So you want to keep all your pencil marks on what is going to be the back side of your colored paper. And then this is why this matting sheet is also important. Oftentimes we forget from the time we do the math to the time we cut the mat what size we have picked. So this is a visual reminder of that. So I'm going to make marks that are 2 inches from each side. So 1, 2, make a mark. And then I'm going to go from the other side. 1, 2, make a mark. Does that make sense how I did that? Did I lose anybody? Okay. Now I'm going to slide the ruler down. I'm going to make my second mark. Same thing. 1, 2 from this side. 1, 2 from this side. And then I am going to connect those marks. Now these marks right here are going to be guide marks for the mat. And I'm going to do the same thing here on the opposite dimension. So 1, 2, make a mark. 1, 2, make a mark. slide it down. 1, 2, make a mark. 1, 2, make a mark. So where I'm using 2-inch measurements, if you had chosen a different size for your border, like if you had chosen a 1-inch border or a 3-inch border or a 1.5-inch border, then everywhere where I made a 2-inch mark, you would make that 1.5 or 3-inch or 1-inch or however big it is. You want to make the same size all the way around, okay? And then our step is right on here. We're going to cut out the middle window, but we are not going to cut past the corners. And here's a little illustration. So you're going to use your scissors, just poke in the middle, and then we're going to cut up to and down those window lines, but we're only going to cut right up to the corner, and then we're going to stop and turn. And when you're cutting, try to be as neat as possible. This is part of the craftsmanship of your piece. This is something that cabaret judges noted, that they liked that the pieces were matted, and this is a requirement of cabaret, but they did note that many of the mats were not particularly well cut, and that affects how the craftsmanship of your piece is visible to viewers. Okay, so this piece is just scrap. We don't need that. Now this is our window. And this is going to cover our piece like so. Okay, so you can trim these if you want. And in fact, it does make it a little bit easier to kind of line up your piece. But technically speaking, unless it pokes out, you don't really have to. I'm just going to do a really quick cut for right now so that you can see how to do the next step. Okay, so I have my mat. I'm going to do it sideways so that it's easier to see. I have my mat pencil side up, and I am going to put my artwork face down. Okay, now this artwork is kind of off center as far as the subject, right? So I might not want to, remember our mat is gonna cover about a 1/2 inch on each side. I might not want to cover a full 1/2 inch on this side because that might cover too much of the subject. So I might wanna cheat a little bit if my subject is on this side. Okay, I'm gonna use these pencil marks to line up where this is with the window. But if my subject is over here, right, then I might wanna cheat it a little bit this way so that I cover less of the subject and more of the background, okay? And then the last step is you would just use, that was right in the microphone. You're gonna use masking tape and tape all the way down all 4 edges. Don't be tempted to just tape the corners. Don't be tempted to just do little tiny pieces. We have tape. We have plenty of it. Just go ahead and tape because it has to be secure so that it doesn't warp or get weird. And you want this to become part of your artwork. So then when you flip it over, you have a nicely matted piece with your nice border. If you were going to do something like a double mat and you wanted a different color to contrast behind this, like maybe you wanted something like this, right? Then you could do another mat and use these mat dimensions as your artwork dimensions. So you would just have another window that goes on top, and that way you could have a contrasting color. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm gonna give you your matting sheet. Go ahead and cut out your artwork if it has some wonky scraps around it, and then you can start doing your math on the sheet.